For over a century and a half, the Catholic Church has buried this truth in silence, and for reasons that remain shrouded in deliberate concealment. These documents, hidden away for generations, chronicle the systematic disappearance of 23 nuns from St. Mary's Convent, nestled in the shadow of Lake Michigan between the years 1854 and 1862. For decades, church authorities dismissed these records as clerical oversights or mere misinterpretations of routine reports. Yet the truth refused to remain buried. Now, unearthed by fate and renovation, the testimony of 3 independent diocesan inspectors, alongside a cache of private letters concealed for more than a century within a sealed cavity of stone walls, reveals a story so chilling, so incomprehensibly dark that even the most seasoned historians have hesitated to pronounce it real. What follows here is the first full account, the unflinching chronicle of what many scholars deem the most disturbing case of religious corruption in American history. A case so perilous to the Church's image that immense resources have been devoted to erasing it from memory. Before we journey deeper into the shadow of St. Mary's Convent, I must ask, if the tale you are about to hear already unsettles you, subscribe to our channel. Here we reveal the hidden truths of America's darkest religious secrets, and our community of seekers spans all 50 states. Tonight, from where do you watch? Leave your mark in the comments below. And now, let us step back to the year 1854, to the quiet, unsettled Wisconsin countryside. A morning fog lay thick over the waters of Lake Michigan, curling and drifting like a living shroud. Through that haze, Bishop William Quarter's carriage rolled up the winding drive, crossing the threshold into a place that would become St. Mary's Convent. The Catholic Church had acquired this grand estate, once in the proud mansion of a lumber baron, surrounded by 30 acres of untouched woodland. Their vision was clear: to establish the first major Catholic institution in a vast, predominantly Protestant territory. This was more than expansion. It was a calculated move, part of a larger campaign to anchor Catholic influence in America's restless frontier, where Protestant congregations were already cementing their hold. The limestone mansion rose like a fortress of faith, 3 austere wings converging beneath a bell tower that cut sharply into the sky. Built in 1842, its Gothic arches and narrow windows seemed almost sentient, watching silently over the land as if guarding secrets too heavy to bear. From the central structure extended 2 wings, the east for the sisters' quarters, the west for a planned orphanage and infirmary. Behind it all, a small chapel stood sentinel, its spire piercing the air above the forest canopy, visible for miles across the flat Wisconsin plains. But not all welcomed the arrival of these women cloaked in black. Local Protestant families regarded them with suspicion, their habits and Irish accents marking them as strangers in a land dominated by German and Scandinavian settlers. Here, in these rural townships, faith was simple, democratic. Catholicism's hierarchy, its arcane rituals and hidden rites, felt alien. It felt dangerous. On the day of consecration, a modest crowd assembled at the iron gates. "Papists," muttered Elijah Hoffman, a respected elder of the Lutheran Church, eyes fixed on the robed figures entering the chapel. "They'll bring their foreign ways here. They will corrupt our children with their idolatry." Beside him, Wilhelm Schmidt nodded, his voice low and heavy with foreboding. "My grandfather fled Germany to escape the persecution of Catholics, and now they follow us, even here." This unease was more than prejudice, it was the soil from which the tragedy would grow. Yet within those gates, Bishop Quarter proclaimed with solemn conviction, "St. Mary's will stand as a beacon of God's mercy in this wilderness." His voice echoed within the freshly consecrated chapel, where pale morning light fell through simple stained glass, pooling like colored water upon the wooden pews, a light that would illuminate not only hope, but the shadow that lay ahead. Under the austere guidance of Mother Superior Catherine Murphy, this fledgling convent was destined to become more than a sanctuary. It would stand as a bastion of mercy, a refuge in a wilderness both physical and spiritual. It would shelter orphans abandoned to fate, offer comfort to widows cast adrift by grief, and extend healing to the sick, whose ailments were both body and soul. Bishop William Quarter's Boston accent rolled through the stone corridors as he stepped forward to introduce the three women chosen to shepherd this holy endeavor. Mother Superior Catherine, Sister Elizabeth Foster, and Sister Margaret Clark, each drawn from venerable convents in the East, each entrusted with a sacred mission. Mother Superior Catherine stood with an authority that seemed carved in stone. Her black habit was immaculate, her bearing imperious. At 42, she commanded respect not merely by title, but by the unyielding conviction in her gaze. Her sharp features and pale, penetrating blue eyes gave her an air of knowing, an unsettling clarity that seemed to pierce the hearts of those before her. Her hands, when lifted in prayer, were both elegant and decisive, hands that could cradle a frightened child or enforce discipline upon a wavering novice. An unusual blue, those who met her would whisper, eyes that see through pretense and concealment. Bishop Quarter spoke of her with solemn assurance. Mother Catherine comes to us with the highest recommendations. Her work at St. Augustine's in Boston has prepared her well for the trials of life on the frontier, Sister E's. Elizabeth, aged 38, carried warmth like a quiet flame. Her perpetual smile and soft voice bespoke a gentleness suited to her charge, overseeing the convent's orphanage. Plump and maternal, with cheeks flushed in quiet cheer, she seemed made for the work of comforting lost children. Her words came with measured hesitation, each syllable weighed as if she were guarding a deeper truth, a subtle precision that some heard as thoughtfulness, others as calculation. Sister Margaret, 35, possessed a mind tempered by knowledge and a hand steady in healing. Entrusted with the infirmary, she bore a seriousness that bordered on austerity. Tall and lean, her dark eyes missed nothing, and her fingers moved with the precision of a surgeon measuring life by the drop. Her expertise in both herbal remedies and modern medical practices had earned her praise from physicians in Boston and New York, a reputation she brought to this isolated convent. Completing the founding community were 20 younger nuns, most in their 20s, fresh from Ireland, their faces a mixture of devotion and uncertainty. They stood in perfect formation, habits crisp and heads bowed, as Bishop Quarter invoked God's blessing upon each. Sister Agnes O'Connor, Sister Bernadette Walsh, Sister Teresa Donovan, Sister Mary Collins, young women who had forsaken home and kin to answer the call of God in a strange and distant land. Their solemnity during the ceremony sometimes cracked in private moments, revealing glimpses of youthful doubt hidden beneath their vows. "The Lord has called us to this wilderness," Mother Catherine addressed them that first evening, her voice a firm beacon in the flickering candlelight that cast long shadows across the refectory. The scent of fresh bread mingled with the faint bitterness of weak tea, and the chill of a Wisconsin autumn seeped through the stone walls despite the fire burning low at the far end of the room. "We will face hardships unknown to our Eastern sisters. We will meet suspicion from those who fear our faith. Yet we shall prevail through devotion, through sacrifice." For the young sisters, far from hearth and home, her words became a lifeline. In the dormitory's quiet, Sister Agnes leaned toward Sister Bernadette, their narrow cots scarcely an arm's length apart. "Do you think the locals will ever accept us?" she whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts at courage. Sister Bernadette's fingers tightened around hers in the darkness. "They feared our Lord at first. We must show them by our works that our purpose is good." Their whispered conversation dissolved into silence when footsteps echoed in the corridor. Deliberate, measured, Mother Catherine was making her rounds, her presence a watchful shadow ensuring all was in order on that first night. In time, the convent became a living organism, its days shaped by a rhythm of prayer and purpose. At 3 o'clock each morning the bell would toll, calling the sisters to matins, a sacred summons that bound them together in faith, duty, and the shadow of the unknown. The bells tolled in the pre-dawn gloom, their deep, sonorous clangs cutting through the cold Wisconsin night like a summons from another realm. One by one, the sisters stirred from their slumber, leaving warm beds to kneel upon the chapel's unyielding stone floors. 7 times each day, the air was filled with the somber, unbroken drone of Latin chants, prayers rising and falling like the breath of some unseen, ancient presence. From the dim hush of matins in the stillness before sunrise to the final whisper of compline at 9 o'clock in the evening, those sacred intonations became as woven into the fabric of this place as the wind threading through the pines or the distant, mournful lowing of cattle across the frozen plain. Between their hours of prayer, the sisters devoted themselves to a regiment of works that gave their days both purpose and rigidity. They operated a modest orphanage for abandoned children, tended the sick within a small infirmary, and cultivated expansive gardens to sustain themselves. Their lives followed a disciplined cycle: prayer, labor, simple sustenance, brief moments of rest, and then prayer again, a rhythm designed to strip away the self and bind the soul wholly to God's service. By the winter of 1854, 12 children had found shelter under the convent's care. Orphans mostly born of Irish immigrant laborers felled in railway mishaps or lumbering accidents. Sister Elizabeth oversaw their needs with a devotion that seemed both maternal and deliberate. She taught them letters and numbers alongside the catechism of Catholic faith, offering comfort as much as instruction. On Sundays, a handful of local families would wander through the gates after Mass, bearing small gifts of food or clothing. Some inquired gently about adoption. The infirmary, under Sister Margaret's watch, began as a humble chamber, but soon gained quiet renown. Her knowledge of traditional remedies, poultices to ease inflammation, herbal infusions to cool fevered skin, compresses for the chest worn against the bite of winter, proved invaluable. When the storms came, choking the roads with snow and cutting off travel to physicians, her skill became a lifeline. Her cures, wrought from herbs and careful calculation, impressed even the most skeptical neighbors. "They keep to themselves," admitted Elijah Hoffman one Sunday to his congregation, voice heavy with reluctant acknowledgement. "But they do good work. Their ways are not ours, but perhaps in this vast country there is room for different paths to heaven." Among them all, Sister Agnes O'Connor, only 23, was the youngest of St. Mary's sisters. Her letters home, preserved in the archives of the Dublin diocese, offer a rare and intimate window into those early months of the convent's existence. Her careful script fills page after page with observations, the mundane and the profound, though for the discerning reader a shift in tone emerges over time. By December 1854, her words bear the weight of fatigue and sorrow. "The work is harder than I ever imagined," she wrote, her paper smudged as if by tears. "My hands are raw from washing linens in ice-cold water, and the chapel stones feel like ice beneath our knees during morning prayers. But Mother Catherine assures us that our sacrifices please God." She wrote of Sister Elizabeth's kindness, of extra blankets on bitter nights, and of patient instruction in caring for the orphans. She wrote, too, of a fever that had swept through the children just weeks before. "They burned with such heat, we feared we would lose them all, but Sister Margaret's tincture of willow bark and honey brought them relief. I believe we are doing God's work, though I confess I still cry myself to sleep some nights, missing the green hills of home." Yet what these letters never captured, what Sister Agnes herself may never have fully perceived, was the subtle transformation unfolding within St. Mary's walls. Mother Catherine's leadership, at first stern but tempered, was evolving into something far darker. Minor breaches of convent discipline, once met with gentle admonition, now drew increasingly severe penances. One cold January evening in 1855, Sister Josephine Brady's hands trembled as she tried to mend a tear in her habit. Earlier that day, in the hush of afternoon prayers, a sudden cough had broken the vow of silence. Her transgression, though small, carried a weight that night. She was commanded to kneel on dried peas, reciting the entire rosary, an act of penance that would leave her body bruised and her spirit tested. The walls of St. Mary's, already steeped in prayer and work, were beginning to absorb something heavier. a slow, creeping shadow that would soon suffuse every corner of the convent. It was a penance that left her knees raw, bleeding and swollen, the skin broken beneath the weight of obedience. Sister Mary Collins moved quietly beside her, guiding thread through fabric, their eyes meeting in a fleeting moment of unspoken sympathy. "Do not draw attention to your weakness." Mother Catherine's voice cut sharply through the hushed workroom, a sound that made both women startle. She had entered without notice, a silent step that seemed to grow more unnerving with each passing day, a skill that unsettled the younger sisters more deeply than they dared admit. Sister Josephine must learn that discipline is the cornerstone of devotion, her voice carrying with deliberate authority, echoing faintly against the stone walls. By the spring of 1855, St. Mary's had earned a reputation for extraordinary charity. When a virulent measles epidemic swept through the lumber camps that dotted the surrounding wilderness, Sister Margaret's infirmary opened its doors to dozens of afflicted workers, ministering without regard to creed. The convent's care won quiet admiration. Modest donations began to arrive from grateful families, and even Protestant ministers, once openly suspicious, conceded the good wrought behind those limestone walls. Yet, beneath that veneer of piety, life within St. Mary's was shifting, subtle changes creeping into the daily rhythm that none dared name aloud. The communal meals, once filled with soft conversation, had grown silent affairs. Heads bowed over bowls of thin soup or plates of coarse bread. Recreation hours, once marked by gentle laughter and whispered confidences, now passed under a tense hush. Sisters who had crossed oceans together, bound by faith and purpose, now moved like shadows, careful not to attract notice. The first unmistakable disturbance came in April of 1855. Sister Agnes failed to appear for morning prayers. One absence was enough to ripple through the chapel, waiting. 9 sisters kneeling in formation, one place inexplicably empty. Quiet glances were exchanged, concerns unspoken, until Mother Catherine entered. Her footsteps were soundless in the candlelit room, her expression unreadable, her presence a cold authority. "Sister Agnes has been called to assist at our mission in Minnesota," she announced at breakfast, her tone final, admitting no question. Her words fell like a decree. "We shall all pray for her success in this new endeavor." Sister Bernadette's spoon clattered against her bowl. "But Mother," she began, her voice breaking the silence, but she fell abruptly mute under Mother Catherine's pale, unblinking gaze. "Are you suggesting, Sister Bernadette, that a bride of Christ requires permission from her sisters rather than her superiors before answering God's call?" The question lingered in the cold air like frost over stone. "No, Mother. Forgive me." Bernadette lowered her eyes to the cooling porridge before her. No one had witnessed Sister Agnes packing. No one had seen her depart. In her letters home, she had made no mention of a transfer. But within the strict hierarchy of convent life, Mother Catherine's word was final. No question would pass beyond it. That evening, in the dormitory, a quiet unease took hold. Several sisters noticed Sister Agnes's few possessions had vanished. Her prayer book, the small wooden rosary given to her by her mother, the extra woolen stockings for Wisconsin winters, all gone, as if she had indeed departed as announced. Yet in hushed moments, doubt lingered. Sister Mary Collins, who had slept beside Agnes, whispered to Sister Teresa Donovan in the shadowed quiet of the garden. Her cloak still hangs on its peg. The words fell between them like a shadow, unspoken but heavy, as if hinting that something more than a simple transfer had taken place. Within the stone walls of St. Mary's, under the watch of Mother Catherine, the air had begun to change. And in that change lay a promise of secrets yet to be revealed. Would she have truly left without it in April, destined for Minnesota? Sister Teresa cast a furtive glance toward the convent windows, her brow drawn with unease, as though the stone walls themselves might answer her question. "Perhaps she was given another for the journey," she murmured, half to herself. "We should not speculate, sister," came the quiet admonition, though it carried the weight of something unspoken. 3 months later, the pattern repeated. Sister Bernadette Walsh vanished without warning, slipping from the convent as quietly as if the night itself had claimed her. The bishop has requested Sister Bernadette's assistance with a delicate matter in Chicago, Mother Catherine announced with measured calm. Before dawn, Bernadette departed, leaving behind nothing but an empty cell and a neatly offered explanation, no farewell, no word to her sisters. During the convent's work period later that day, Sister Elizabeth offered what was meant to be reassurance. Sister Bernadette has shown such skill with the orphans that the bishop has requested she help establish proper procedures at the new foundling home in Chicago. Her voice bore the prescribed blend of pride and pious acceptance, yet Sister Mary Collins could not miss the warmth usually shining in. Elizabeth's eyes was gone, replaced by a coldness that seemed to chill the air around her. By the winter of 1855, 3 more sisters had been transferred to distant missions, each departure following the same disquieting pattern. A young nun, often one marked by beauty, gentle grace, or unusual talent, would be absent one morning. Mother Catherine would announce her reassignment, always to a place too remote for verification. Letters sent by anxious families to these supposed new assignments returned months later, bearing only brief, strangely formal replies, and when examined years afterward by handwriting experts, these responses were all found to have been penned by the same hand, not by the missing sisters themselves. Among the few to voice suspicion was Sister Teresa Donovan, tall, broad-shouldered from years of farm work before her vows, and possessed of a bluntness uncommon in convent life. She had already drawn Mother Catherine's quiet disapproval for questioning the growing severity of penances imposed on younger sisters. One humid afternoon in the summer of 1856, while their hands were stained with earth-harvesting early carrots in the convent garden, she leaned toward Sister Mary Collins and whispered, "It seems strange that Rome would request so many transfers without proper documentation." That year, the convent garden had grown, expanded with a new section devoted entirely to medicinal herbs, tended by Sister Margaret behind a high fence, to which none but she and Mother Catherine held the key. "And have you noticed it's always the youngest and prettiest who are called away?" Sister Teresa's Irish brogue thickened in her agitation. First Agnes, with her golden hair, then Bernadette with her beautiful singing voice, then Catherine with her flawless complexion, and Josephine with her voice faltered as a shadow fell across the garden bed. Sister Mary Who shed her quickly, her eyes flicking nervously toward the convent windows. There, standing like a sentinel in the dim light, was Sister Margaret, her thin, expressionless face unreadable, watching. "Mother Catherine has her reasons. We must trust in her wisdom," Sister Mary murmured, though her own voice trembled. The following week, Sister Teresa was gone. Called to a contemplative retreat in Montreal, the official explanation given at morning prayers, no one asked for proof, no one challenged the decree. That evening, as Sister Mary made her bed in the hush of the dormitory, she found a small scrap of paper tucked beneath her pillow. It was a torn page from Sister Teresa's prayer book. In the margin, hastily scrawled, were words that seemed to carry a prayer and a warning both. "Something is wrong. If I disappear, tell Father Ryan." The sight of her friend's handwriting, the ink still faintly fresh, sent a chill deep into Sister Mary's soul, a dread unrelated to the autumn air, slipping through the cold stone walls. By 1857, within St. Mary's walls, the pattern had become undeniable. Of the original 20 junior sisters, only 12 remained. Official explanations continued to be offered, but the unspoken truth weighed heavily in every corner of the convent. A silence had settled, not born of peace, but of something far darker. Special missions, silent retreats, transfers to distant nursing posts during devastating outbreaks, to the world beyond those weathered limestone walls, St. Mary's continued to stand as a place of charity and faith. The sick still came to Sister Margaret's infirmary, guided by hope and the reputation of her skill. Orphans still found shelter beneath Sister Elizabeth's careful care, their days shaped by prayer and quiet instruction. On Sundays, visitors beheld nothing untoward, the solemn processions of black-clad figures moving with practiced grace from chapel to garden to refectory, a living picture of sanctity. Yet within the stone walls, something had shifted. Fear had taken root. It became a presence as tangible as the cold. It curled in the corridors, lingered in candlelit cells, and found voice in whispers that ended abruptly when footsteps approached. The remaining sisters spoke softly, avoided solitude, and watched with dread as their numbers dwindled under circumstances no one dared name aloud. Under Mother Catherine's hand, authority hardened into something severe. Small breaches of convent discipline no longer drew gentle admonition. They demanded penance. Days of fasting, nights spent kneeling in prayer upon unforgiving stone, public confessions of ever more intimate sins. Sister Claire O'Donnell, caught with a small piece of chocolate sent by her family, was summoned before the entire community. Kneeling in the flickering candlelight, she confessed to gluttony and deception unworthy of a bride of Christ. Mother Catherine's voice rang with cold finality as she pronounced her sentence. 3 days of fasting, with nothing but water and a single piece of bread each evening. On the second day, when Sister Claire collapsed during chapel prayers, it was Sister Margaret who came to her side with smelling salts, her thin lips curving in a faint expression that some would later call a smile. One bitterly cold night in January of 1858, Sister Mary Collins awoke to muffled sounds from the cell next to her. Through the thin separating wall she heard sobbing, low and choking, followed by a voice she recognized at once, sharp and commanding. "Mother Catherine's. You will come with us now. Make any noise and you'll regret it." There was the sound of shuffling feet, then silence. Mary lay rigid beneath her coarse blanket, her heart pounding so loud she feared it would betray her wakefulness. The floorboards outside creaked under slow, deliberate steps, 1 set, 2 sets, 3, retreating down the corridor. Then came a sound that would haunt Sister Mary's dreams for years to come. A muffled cry, stifled before it could escape, followed by the dragging of a body, the slow scrape of something unwilling to walk of its own accord. The next morning, in the refectory, Mother Catherine spoke with her customary calm. Sister Rebecca has been called to serve at a frontier mission in the Dakota Territory. The native children there require instruction, and Sister Rebecca's patience with the orphans has prepared her well for this holy task. Her pale eyes swept the room and lingered on Sister Mary for a moment longer than propriety allowed. We shall miss her gentle presence, but rejoice in God's purpose for her talents. Sister Mary, trembling beneath her habit, maintained her composure through morning prayers. Her rosary beads clicked softly between her fingers. Each whispered, "Hail Mary," swallowed, in a mind racing with unanswerable questions. What had happened to Sister Rebecca? What had happened to all the others? Later that afternoon, as she swept the corridor outside Mother Catherine's office, her ears caught fragments of a conversation too chilling to ignore. The heavy oak door was not fully closed. Voices drifted through the narrow gap. "The doctor says," one voice murmured, "this one will fetch a higher price." It was Sister Elizabeth, her voice stripped of its usual gentleness, replaced by a cold calculation. Sister Mary would never have recognized had she not been standing at that very door, dustbrush frozen in her hand. "He says men pay extra for the innocent ones." The words hung in the corridor like a curse, and in that instant Sister Mary understood that the shadows gathering in St. Mary's had grown far darker than any penance or holy duty. Something hidden, something unspeakable, was moving behind those stone walls, and it was far from finished. "We need to be more careful with the timing," Sister Margaret murmured, the faint sound of glass softly clinking as she arranged her medicines, each movement deliberate, the rustle of jars and bottles echoing like a whisper of secrecy in the quiet chamber. 3 in 1 month raises questions. The bishop's secretary mentioned it in his last letter. Mother Catherine's dismissive laugh cut through the room like a blade, cold and dry, sending an involuntary shiver down Sister Mary's spine. "The bishop is easily managed," she said with quiet assurance, as if plotting rather than speaking. "Another donation to his cathedral fund, and his questions will vanish. Besides, we have established the pattern well enough. No one questions nuns being sent to frontier missions or succumbing to illness during their charitable work." Sister Margaret's voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "What about the Collins girl?" Her words lingered in the air like a warning. "She watches too closely. I've seen her listening at doors." A tense silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of Sister Margaret arranging her vials. Sister Mary's breath caught. Her heart seemed to stop in that oppressive stillness. "We'll wait," Mother Catherine finally said, her tone like the pronouncement of a fate sealed. "She's too plain to fetch much, and she keeps correspondence with her brother in the seminary. Disappearing too many at once draws attention. Rebecca will keep the doctor's clients." Satisfied for now. Sister Mary slipped away before she could be discovered, her mind a storm of questions and dread. What had become of her missing sisters? What fate had claimed Sister Rebecca last night? That muffled cry, that dragging sound through the cold stone corridors. And who, truly, was this doctor they spoke of in guarded tones? The pieces began to fall into place in her mind like shards of some terrible puzzle. The missing nuns, always the youngest, always the fairest. The strange visits of well-dressed benefactors who toured the convent with Mother Catherine. The unexplained sounds drifting from the locked north wing in the dead of night. The growing coffers of the convent, swelling despite its professed humility. That night, sleepless in her narrow cell, Sister Mary prayed and wrestled with her conscience. By dawn she had reached a desperate decision. During her weekly duty collecting eggs from the chicken coop, the only occasion she was permitted beyond the convent walls without supervision, she made her move. She slipped a hastily written note into the pocket of Jimmy Fletcher, a freckled-faced 12-year-old boy who brought milk to the convent each morning. His eyes widened at the unexpected touch, the light brushing of her fingers against his pocket. Sister Mary had never spoken to Jimmy before. The convent's rules forbade casual conversation with outsiders, especially males of any age. "Please deliver this to Father Thomas at St. Joseph's Church in town," she whispered, pressing a small silver cross into his hand. The cross was her only possession of value, her confirmation gift, a talisman now heavy with urgency. "Tell no one else. Lives depend on it." The boy nodded solemnly, his freckled face set with an understanding far beyond his years, unaware of the dark thread of terror he had just been bound into. "Yes, sister, I promise." Those words, penned in haste, survive today within the fragile pages of diocesan archives, preserved like a whisper from the past. The note itself is brief, yet its weight is immeasurable. Something evil happens at St. Mary's. Nuns disappearing, not sent away as claimed. I fear for my life. Please send help. It is signed simply, Sister Mary Collins. The small scrap of paper, stained by time, rested in the hands of Father Thomas Ryan, the young Irish priest who had received it. For months he had harbored quiet suspicions about Mother Catherine. During his monthly visits to St. Mary's to offer Mass, he had noted the dwindling numbers of sisters, a pattern unspoken, a silence growing heavier with each passing season. Mother Catherine's explanations, always gracious but vague, had left him unsettled. Yet, as a humble parish priest, he possessed little authority to challenge a Mother Superior, cloaked in both piety and influence. Father Ryan paced his modest study that evening, the worn floorboards groaning beneath his boots like whispered warnings. His fingers tightened around the silver cross Sister Mary had pressed into the pocket of a boy she barely knew. Heavy in his palm, the cross spoke to him of trust and desperation, the kind only given in the gravest of need. This was not a token parted with lightly. The urgency of her words, coupled with his own mounting doubts, demanded action. But what action could a lone priest take against a woman such as Mother Catherine with her influence and her allies? Rather than confront her directly, Father Ryan resolved to seek counsel. The following morning, he embarked on a full-day journey to Milwaukee, the road alternating between treacherous stretches of ice and treacle-thick mud. His cassock spattered, his breath steaming in the cold air, he arrived at the residence of his superior, Bishop John Henney. The bishop's study was a world apart from Father Ryan's parish home. Warm, richly furnished, a sanctuary of polished wood and quiet authority. Their conversation began, as all such meetings did, with the cathedral. The construction of Milwaukee's new St. John's Cathedral dominated Bishop Henney's attention, his pride radiating as he spread architectural drawings across the desk. "It will be the finest cathedral west of New York," he declared, his German accent still shaping his words after decades in America, "a proper monument to our faith in this Protestant wilderness." Father Ryan listened with respectful silence, waiting for the right moment to speak. When the bishop finally inquired after his parish, he laid his concerns bare. He spoke of the missing sisters at St. Mary's, of the inconsistent explanations, of Sister Mary's desperate plea hidden in that precious silver cross. The bishop's warmth faltered, his expression hardened into measured neutrality. "These are serious accusations, Father," he said at last, setting aside the cross without examining its surface. "Mother Catherine has explained each transfer to my satisfaction." "But Your Excellency, 8 nuns have vanished in less than 3 years, Father Ryan pressed, his voice taut with urgency. "There is no proper documentation of these transfers, no consistent correspondence, no proof these women exist in the places they were sent." The bishop leaned back, his eyes narrowing. "The frontier missions require educated women." His tone brooked no argument. Rising from his chair, he signaled the end of the meeting. "I will not have you spreading rumors that could damage the Church's reputation in this Protestant region. Mother Catherine has been most generous in supporting our cathedral building fund. Her spiritual leadership is beyond reproach." As Father Ryan was escorted toward the door, the bishop added, his voice low but edged round, with warning, "Focus on your parish duties, Father Ryan." It was a dismissal, yet for Father Ryan it rang not with finality, but with the echo of something far darker. Outside, winter wind pressed against the windows like a silent witness. Inside, the shadow of St. Mary's, and whatever lay within its walls, had grown heavier still. "Leave the administration of convents to those appointed by God for that purpose." The words of Bishop Henny rang in Father Ryan's ears as he stepped away from the bishop's study, their weight heavy, final and unyielding. Discouraged, yes, but not deterred. If the proper channels would not confront the shadows gathering within St. Mary's, he would need to find another path, one less sanctioned, one that would pierce the veil of secrecy cloaking the convent. That opportunity came in March of 1858. Bishop Henny, in what seemed an ordinary assignment, tasked Father Ryan with collecting the annual financial reports from every parish and religious institution within the diocese. An official duty, it granted him unfettered access, a legitimate reason to approach St. Mary's records and perhaps uncover the truth of the missing sisters. The March wind cut like a blade through Father Ryan's heavy coat as his horse-drawn buggy rattled along the winding road toward the convent. St. Mary's rose ahead of him, its familiar silhouette altered somehow, an air of disquiet clinging to its walls. The gardens, once vibrant with early spring life, now stood neglected, weeds pressed against stone paths, and dark soil lay untended. The windows, instead of catching light, were dim and opaque, as if they sought to hide what lay within. The bell tower, once a herald of each divine office, tolled now with diminished voice, infrequent, muffled, reluctant. At the convent door he was met by Sister Elizabeth. Her smile, usually warm and welcoming, was strained, fragile. Beneath it lay dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights. Her habit, so meticulously maintained in earlier visits, betrayed small signs of neglect, a missing pin, a faint stain upon her white collar. "Father Ryan, we weren't expecting you today," she said, her voice carrying an edge she did not intend to conceal. "Mother Catherine is indisposed." Her words led him to a small, cold parlor, stripped of the comfort of the study where he had previously spoken with the Mother Superior. "She asks that you leave the diocesan forms here," Sister Elizabeth continued softly, "and she will complete them by week's end." "I'm afraid the bishop was quite clear," Father Ryan replied, removing his coat and placing his briefcase heavily upon the table, striving for an authority he did not fully feel. Youth and his low standing in the church hierarchy pressed against him. "I am to review the records personally this year. Financial irregularities have been discovered in several institutions." The warmth in Sister Elizabeth's smile vanished entirely. "That won't be possible today. Our bookkeeper, Sister Margaret, is attending to a dying child in the infirmary." "Then I shall wait," Father Ryan said firmly, settling into the chair with the weight of his purpose. "Or perhaps I might tour the convent while I do." His voice carried a note of quiet challenge. It has been some time since I've seen the improvements to the orphanage I have heard so much about. A flicker passed across Sister Elizabeth's face. Fear? Anger? It was gone before Father Ryan could name it. "As you wish, Father," she said at last, though her tone was edged with hesitation. "Though I must ask you to avoid the North Wing. We have several cases of influenza there, and we would not want you exposed." The North Wing, the one place Father Ryan had never been permitted to enter, said to house the nuns' private quarters. The words sharpened his suspicion. The tour unfolded slowly, the halls colder than he remembered, the air heavy and still. What he saw deepened his unease. A convent functioning far below its stated capacity. Where were the 20 orphans recorded in Mother Catherine's reports to the diocese? Father Ryan counted only 7. Thin, pale children whose eyes darted toward him like frightened birds. They lingered in shadowed corners, silent, as if afraid to be seen. And in that silence, Father Ryan felt the first stirring of certainty that within St. Mary's walls something was being concealed far darker than mere absence. When Father Ryan stepped toward a small girl sweeping the cold stone floor of the dormitory, her broom sweeping in silent rhythm, Sister Elizabeth intervened swiftly, her voice low but firm, summoning the child away on an errand. The girl obeyed without question, casting a furtive glance over her shoulder, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and unease. The infirmary, said to be sheltering dozens of local residents during the season's illness, revealed itself to be something far stranger. Within its modest stone chamber lay only 3 elderly patients, frail figures wrapped in worn blankets, none showing the telltale signs of the reported influenza. Sister Margaret, entrusted with their care and supposedly at the side of a dying child, was nowhere to be found. But the matter that chilled Father Ryan most was the unmistakable reduction in the number of nuns. Just 3 months before, when he had offered Mass at St. Mary's, he counted at least 15 figures in their black habits moving in solemn procession. Today, his careful tally found only 8, including Sister Elizabeth herself. Questions pressed at his mind, and when he asked of the absent sisters, Rebecca, Josephine, Claire, he received only the same vague refrains of transfers, special missions, or distant callings. Passing the laundry room, the warm steam curling upward from great washtubs where 2 silent nuns labored, he addressed Sister Elizabeth again, casually. "And Sister Mary Collins?" Her step faltered, her voice quieter, controlled. "Sister Mary has been assigned to our mission in St. Louis. She departed just last week. Her experience with the orphans made her particularly suited to the work there." Father Ryan inclined his head, hiding the sudden tightening in his chest. The author of the desperate note, the plea for help he now held heavy in his mind, was among the disappeared. His suspicions, until now half-formed, became a conviction. He asked then to see the convent chapel before departing. The chapel greeted him with a quiet decay. Where once it had shone with immaculate care, now there were signs of neglect, dust thick along the altar rails, candlesticks dulled and unpolished, bouquets of flowers wilting where no one had replaced them. The space where 23 nuns had once knelt in devotion now felt hollow, as if the very stones themselves recoiled from something foul that had entered St. Mary's. While Sister Elizabeth stepped away, drawn by a message from a novice father, Father Ryan's gaze drifted toward a side door. One he had learned led into the convent's private residential wing. He moved silently, the corridor beyond thick with shadow and silence, unnatural for mid-afternoon. Many of the cells stood empty, their occupants vanished, their belongings gone, as though swept away by some unseen hand. A sudden sound halted him, faint at first, a tremor of noise that might have been mistaken for the wind. It sharpened into something more certain, a whimper, a moan, carried softly through the stone hall. At the far end, a heavy wooden door stood closed, its surface scarred with age and secured with a substantial iron lock, unlike any others in the wing. Father Ryan approached slowly, breath hushed, his ear pressing toward the grain of the door. The sound came again, human, distressed, laden with desperation. "Is someone there?" he whispered, voice trembling despite himself. "Do you need help?" A pause, then a faint, anguished voice, trembling, breaking the quiet. "Father, Father, is that you? Please, help us, please." Before he could speak again, the air shifted behind him. The unmistakable voice of Mother Catherine cut through the corridor, hard and measured, her tone carrying authority that brooked no challenge. "Father Ryan, this area is strictly cloistered. Your presence here is most inappropriate." He turned slowly. There she stood, framed in shadow, pale and still, flanked by Sister Margaret and a man he did not recognize. Broad-shouldered, clothed not in the garb of clergy or medicine but in the rough, coarse clothing of a laborer. His arms were thick as tree trunks, his face set in a scowl that seemed to promise violence. In that moment, Father Ryan understood that the veil of secrecy surrounding St. Mary's had been pierced, and that what lay behind it was far darker than rumor or suspicion could have prepared him for. "Forgive me, Mother," Father Ryan murmured, each word a careful effort to steady the tremor in his voice. "I became turned about after visiting the chapel." Mother Catherine's pale eyes fixed on him with unblinking scrutiny. Her figure had diminished since his last visit, the black habit hanging loose and worn, yet the authority in her presence seemed sharpened, almost cruel. She regarded him not with kindness, but with the quiet command of one accustomed to absolute obedience. "This wing," she said, her voice low and deliberate, "houses sisters under special spiritual direction. Their seclusion is essential to their devotional practice." "I heard someone calling for help," Father Ryan pressed, the words coming out steadier than he felt, though his heart hammered in protest. "You heard Sister Anne in the midst of her spiritual exercises," Mother Catherine replied, her tone calm, yet edged with finality. Sister Margaret stepped forward, her voice smooth, practiced. "Some of our more dedicated sisters practice mortification of the flesh. Their cries can be misunderstood by those unfamiliar with advanced devotional discipline." Her gaze lingered on Father Ryan for a moment longer than courtesy required. "Mr. Callahan will show you out." Mother Catherine gave a slight nod, her eyes unreadable beneath the flicker of candlelight. "We will send the financial reports to Milwaukee by week's end." The man called Callahan stepped forward. His frame was broad, his clothes rough and work-worn, his face set in a hard, expressionless mask. Yet there was something in his movement, the silent weight of muscle, the deliberate firmness of his grip, that spoke of a man accustomed to carrying out orders by force rather than persuasion. "This way, Father," he said, his voice smooth, but threaded with an unspoken threat. His hand closed about Father Ryan's arm with unnecessary strength, guiding him toward the door with quiet insistence. Father Ryan's gaze caught for a moment the heavy wooden door at the corridor's end, the one locked so securely. His breath caught. A voice, faint and trembling, had come from behind it. What did she mean by us? He wondered, every nerve in his body alert. How many women are kept there, and why? The buggy jolted onto the convent road. Father Ryan urged his horse forward, the animal answering with a sudden surge. His mind raced faster than the pounding of hooves against earth. The locked door, the hidden voices, the vanished sisters, the fearful children, the silent complicity of Mother Catherine, the shadow of Callahan. All these fragments assembled into a terrifying whole. He knew this was no matter for quiet counsel. This was beyond him as a humble parish priest. This was a call for reckoning. Bypassing Bishop Henny, whose dismissal of his concerns now seemed either willful blindness or deliberate complicity, Father Ryan sent an urgent telegram to Archbishop John Hughes in New York. Grave concerns regarding St. Mary's Convent, Wisconsin, suspicious disappearance, deaths of multiple nuns, evidence of imprisonment, possible danger to remaining sisters, request immediate diocesan investigation, local bishop unresponsive, Father Thomas Ryan, St. Joseph's Parish. If you are feeling that chill crawling across your spine as you read this, know you are not alone. Those who have walked with this story before speak of the same. A shudder, a tightening of the breath, an instinctive dread. For what lies hidden in St. Mary's is not simply history. It is a shadow that still reaches forward to the present. Take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who reveres the haunting depths of true historical mysteries. Your engagement fuels our journey deeper into America's hidden past, the places where history bleeds into shadow. Now we return to the year 1858, to a day when an ominous storm gathered not in the heavens, but over the very heart of St. Mary's Convent, a storm that would rip aside the veil of sanctity and expose horrors too grotesque to imagine. Archbishop Hughes, a man renowned for his relentless discipline and unflinching command of diocesan affairs, acted with sudden resolve. Instead of alerting Bishop Henny, he dispatched his personal secretary, Monsignor Patrick Kelly, a man whose presence alone carried the weight of unshakable authority, to conduct a surprise inspection of St. Mary's. On April 17, 1858, Monsignor Kelly arrived at the convent gates without warning, flanked by Father Ryan and two senior priests drawn from neighboring parishes. The morning broke serene, with clear skies and mild air, the sort of spring dawn that should have carried promise to Wisconsin farmers preparing for the season's planting. Yet as the clerical procession approached the ancient limestone walls of St. Mary's, an unsettling stillness clung to the air. Ravens wheeled above the bell tower, their harsh cries shattering the silence like spectral warnings. The reception that awaited them spoke of concealed dread. Mother Catherine, the convent's usually unshakable matron, stood at the threshold, pale, her habit hanging loosely on her slight frame. Her composure seemed fractured. The flush upon her face hinted at anger, fear, or some mingling of both, as her eyes fell upon Monsignor Kelly's official robes and the sealed letter he bore. Within the courtyard, a scene of quiet chaos unfolded. Nuns hurried through narrow corridors, whispering urgently. Through an open window came the sound of hurried footsteps and the faint, acrid scent of burning paper drifting from the kitchens. Father Ryan caught sight of two young sisters bearing armfuls of documents toward the stove, their movement frantic, deliberate. "This is most irregular, Monsignor," Mother Catherine said as they crossed into the convent's main hall. Her voice, normally measured, serene, now cracked with brittle unease. "We have protocols for official visitations. Bishop Henny always sends notice weeks in advance." Which is precisely why Archbishop Hughes commanded that no notice be given. Monsignor Kelly replied, his voice cool, measured, carrying the certainty of a man who had faced both war and peace. In his 50s, his silver hair framing a weathered face, he embodied the authority of one who answers only to God. "I have here a letter sealed by the Archbishop himself, authorizing a complete inspection of this institution, every record, every resident. I trust you will cooperate fully." Mother Catherine's gaze flickered toward Sister Margaret, who lingered half-hidden in a shadowed doorway. In that instant, a silent exchange passed between them, unspoken yet heavy with significance. Catherine turned back to Monsignor Kelly with a smile forced and strained. "Of course, Monsignor, St. Mary's has nothing to hide, but I must insist you respect the enclosure of our cloistered sisters. Some are engaged in spiritual exercises that must not be disturbed." "My authority extends to every part of this convent, Mother Catherine," Monsignor Kelly replied, unfolding the letter and letting the Archbishop's seal catch the light. "No exceptions." What followed would unfold over the course of a day destined to enter ecclesiastical history as a descent into unspeakable revelations. Monsignor Kelly's inspection would later fill a 40-page report describing a tableau of horrors unprecedented in the modern church. The investigation split the clerical party. Father Ryan accompanied Monsignor Kelly toward the locked northern wing of the convent, while the others began interrogating visible sisters and poring over financial ledgers. As they neared the forbidden corridor, they were halted by Sister Elizabeth, her gentle countenance replaced by grim resolve. "Mother Catherine has forbidden entrance to this area," she declared. "Monsignor, we have sisters in spiritual retreat." But in that moment, the air itself seemed to tighten. The stillness deepened, as if the walls of St. Mary's itself were holding its breath, guarding a secret that had festered long enough in the shadows. Sister Elizabeth, Monsignor Kelly spoke with deliberate calm, his voice carrying the weight of ecclesiastical authority, yet edged with uncompromising resolve. I speak with the authority of Archbishop Hughes. Open this door, or I will be compelled to deem you in violation of your sacred vow of obedience. For a moment, Sister Elizabeth stood silent, her composure faltering as a shadow of desperation crossed her face. Her voice, barely above a breath, trembled. You don't understand what you are doing. He will be most displeased. Father Ryan's brow furrowed. Do you mean Bishop Henny? She shook her head swiftly, her eyes darting toward the convent's high windows, as though she feared some unseen presence might materialize. Silence stretched taut between them. At last, after a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years, she stepped aside. The locked door, forced open under the inexorable authority of ecclesiastical censure, revealed a scene so harrowing it would later be etched in Monsignor Kelly's 40-page report as a chamber of unholy suffering. Beyond lay a small, suffocating cell, no more than 15 feet square, its purpose now lost to the darkness. Once a storage room, it had been transformed into a prison. Inside, 5 women, among them the missing Sister Rebecca, huddled together in silent despair. The air was thick with the stench of neglect, the metallic tang of unwashed bodies, the bitter odor of human waste. In the corner rested a chamber pot. The floor held only thin, threadbare pallets. A single window, high and small, had been cruelly boarded over, choking the room in near-complete darkness. Only the harsh light spilling through the open door cast their suffering into cruel relief. They were spectral figures of anguish, their habits hung in tatters, clinging to gaunt frames ravaged by hunger and toil, faces hollow, skin stretched taut over bone, their bodies bore marks of cruelty. Among them, Sister Josephine Brady, heavily pregnant, stood as a living contradiction, swollen belly at odds with the skeletal fragility of her limbs. Father Ryan turned away, his hand pressed to his mouth to stave off rising nausea. Monsignor Kelly crossed himself slowly, his voice a trembling invocation. In the name of all that is holy, what has happened here? Sister Rebecca, once vibrant, her laughter alight within the cloister. Now a shadow of herself rose unsteadily to her feet. Her eyes were sunken hollows, her voice a brittle whisper. Father Ryan, you came back. They are preparing us, she murmured, her words barely audible. Father Ryan moved to support her, guiding her to a chair hastily drawn from the corridor. Her lips quivered as she spoke again, barely above breath. For the doctor, for the house in Chicago, Monsignor Kelly leans, and closer, kneeling despite the dignity of his years. What doctor? What house in Chicago? Her voice dropped further, almost to a prayer. Dr. Matthews. He comes to examine us, to see which ones are suitable. She shivered, closing her eyes against the light. The men pay more for nuns, for brides of Christ. That's what Mother Catherine tells them. While Father Ryan and Monsignor Kelly tended to the imprisoned sisters, offering water, bread, and the fragile comfort of prayer, elsewhere in the convent equally damning revelations were unearthed. Behind a hidden door within the infirmary, in Sister Margaret's private quarters, the other priests uncovered shelves lined with vials of suspicious medicines, their purpose cloaked in secrecy. The walls of St. Mary's had spoken, but what they whispered was a nightmare no prayer could exorcise. Within the hidden chamber of Sister Margaret's private quarters, the priests uncovered shelves lined with vials, jars, and bottles, their labels faded, their contents sinister. Among them were laudanum, chloroform, and other substances used for rendering patients unconscious. Medicines transformed here into instruments of something far darker. Bound in worn leather, a journal lay open, its pages filled with meticulous entries, treatments administered to various sisters, clinical notes on their responses, and chilling annotations on their suitability for transportation. Simultaneously, other priests immersed themselves in the convent's ledgers. What they found was far more disturbing than clerical negligence. While the official accounts reported only meager income from donations and manual labor, the books revealed a steady stream of substantial deposits, sums far beyond the reach of a remote frontier convent. Among these entries, certain coded phrases leapt out, references to packages delivered and special commissions completed, each one eerily coinciding with the unexplained disappearance of a sister. One entry read, "Transferred Sister Agnes O'Connor, May 1855. Commission $400. Pack. Age delivered to Chicago establishment. Condition excellent." Another was far more chilling. Sister Teresa Donovan, unsuitable for transfer due to resistance. Terminated November 1856. No commission. As the inquiry deepened, a grotesque pattern emerged, one of calculated abuse and systematic exploitation. Through patient and careful questioning of the traumatized survivors, Monsignor Kelly began to piece together the unthinkable truth. Mother Catherine, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Margaret were not lawful custodians of the faith. They were impostors, cloaked in the garb of holiness, who had infiltrated the Catholic system years earlier. The key testimony came from Sister Claire O'Donnell, one of those rescued, who, once convinced she was safe, whispered her truth in trembling words. "I overheard them one night," she said, clutching a thin blanket around her shoulders despite the warmth of the room. Mother Catherine was arguing with Sister Margaret about their past. She called her Catherine. They said they had come too far to risk exposure, that they had changed identities before, and could do it again if necessary. The real Mother Catherine, Catherine Murphy, had died shortly after arriving in Wisconsin, her death poisoned, according to testimony from Sister Margaret's former assistant in the infirmary. She added something to Mother Catherine's evening tea, the young nun testified in halting tones. The original Mother Catherine began vomiting blood that very night. Sister Margaret diagnosed it as consumption and isolated her. None of us were permitted to attend her in her final days. From that night onward, the three senior sisters seized control of the convent. They wove a network across the Midwest, a sinister web disguised as houses of charity. Their true purpose, a dark commerce of flesh. These so-called sanctuaries operated as brothels for the wealthy, says, tearing to the most grotesque preferences of their clients. Young nuns, chosen for their beauty, innocence, or gentle spirit, were marked for a fate without mercy. First came isolation, penances of increasing severity, imposed for fabricated infractions. Then the drugs, laudanum from Sister Margaret's stores, administered with clinical precision. Those selected were taken deep within the convent's cloisters, where they were violated, not in secrecy, but in a deliberate ritual of corruption. The perpetrators were wealthy men from Chicago, Milwaukee, and as far as St. Louis, who paid exorbitant sums for the privilege of desecrating brides of Christ. They would come after Compline, Sister Rebecca later recounted, her voice stripped of emotion, as if she could only recount her suffering with detachment. The convent was meant to be silent then. Men in fine clothes, smelling of cologne and whiskey. Mother Catherine would lead them to the north wing where we were kept. They paid extra to have us wear our habits during the violation. It was not a secret hidden in whispers. It was a cathedral of corruption, a system built upon prayer twisted into desecration, cloaked in the language of faith, and enforced by those who wore the habit as a mask for something far worse. Those who became pregnant, like Sister Josephine, were not simply hidden. They were wrenched from the world and sealed away in isolation until the moment of delivery. Afterward, they were transported, like trafficked goods, to brothels in Chicago or St. Louis, condemned to lives of forced prostitution. Their sacred vocation, their coerced motherhood, became a grotesque commodity, marketed to a clientele whose appetite for degradation knew no bounds. For these women, there was rarely escape. Many died within years, worn down by disease, broken by abuse, erased quietly from the world. Sister Margaret examined us regularly, Sister, or Rebecca would later testify. Her voice was flat, her words carrying the weight of years of suffering. She kept careful records of our monthly cycles. If we missed our bleeding, she would laugh and tell Mother Catherine we'd be especially valuable now. The men paid more for those carrying children. The convent, in its silence and ritual, served a dual purpose. It was both a sanctuary and a facade, and beneath it, an orphanage that acted as a dark reservoir of victims. Older girls nearing puberty would suddenly vanish into the hands of generous benefactors. Benevolence that was nothing but a cover for trafficking them into the same corrupt network. Boys, too, were claimed, placed with families under the guise of adoption, but in truth, they became unpaid farm laborers, their labor commodified, their lives bartered. Mother Catherine collected the placement fees without hesitation, as though they were tithed to her own altar of cruelty. But the greatest horror was reserved for those who resisted, those who dared question, who threatened to shatter the carefully constructed facade. Sister Teresa Donovan, who had sought answers for the disappearances, was not sent to Montreal as claimed. Sister Rebecca testified with trembling certainty that Teresa had been locked in that same cell where others suffered for weeks. She had been assaulted repeatedly. When her spirit refused to break, she was strangled by a man known only as Callahan. Her body, along with those of at least 3 other sisters who had resisted, was buried in unmarked graves in the convent's vegetable garden, hidden beneath the soil as if to erase both their lives and their suffering. Mother Catherine made us watch, Sister Claire would say later, tears streaming down her face. It was a lesson in obedience. Sister Teresa fought until the end. She was praying the rosary even as Callahan tightened the rope around her neck. As the sun slipped behind the trees that fateful April evening, Monsignor Kelly issued an order that would seal the fate of St. Mary's. The convent was to be closed immediately. The surviving sisters were removed and placed in safe custody. Local authorities were summoned, guards posted to ensure no one fled or tampered with the scene. Mother Catherine, Sister Elizabeth, and Sister Margaret were placed under ecclesiastical arrest, confined to their cells under strict guard until civil authorities could assume custody. "I was following orders," Sister Elizabeth whimpered, her voice breaking as she was led away. Mother Catherine proclaimed it was God's will, that the money gathered was needed for the church's greater glory. Her face remained an impassive mask, pale eyes unreadable as the heavy door closed upon her temporary prison. Sister Margaret alone showed a flicker of something, a strange half-smile tugging at her thin lips as she was escorted away. "You understand nothing of what you've discovered," she said quietly to Monsignor Kelly. "We serve a higher purpose than you can imagine." But the church's attempt at discretion collapsed with shocking speed. Callahan, the burly enforcer who had been absent during the inspection, returned after nightfall. Finding the convent under guard, he fled to Chicago, carrying his secrets with him. By the following morning, when local sheriffs arrived with warrants for arrest, Mother Catherine and Sister Margaret had vanished without trace. Only Sister Elizabeth remained, found kneeling in the chapel in a state of catatonic shock. The window to her cell was still locked from the inside. The door bore no sign of forced entry. The convent itself had become a living enigma, a place sealed in silence, concealing a darkness that even the light of justice could not penetrate. It was as though she had vanished into the thin air itself, slipping beyond reach without a trace. Yet the truth was far darker, far more deliberate. The convent's long and shadowed history concealed secrets even the highest church authorities could not have foreseen. Beneath its limestone walls lay hidden passages, escape routes that had perhaps been forged in the building's earliest days, when it stood not as a house of prayer, but as the mansion of a lumber baron. In those rough frontier years, such concealed corridors might have been crafted for illicit meetings, or for hasty departures in the face of peril. The civil investigation that followed tore open the veil on the full scope of the operation. Financial records seized from Mother Catherine's hidden safe revealed transactions totaling more than $100,000, a sum that would amount to roughly $3 million in today's currency, amassed over the course of 8 years. In those ledgers, coded entries documented an unthinkable ledger of human trafficking, 23 nuns and 17 orphaned girls, each transferred to brothels across the Midwest. Correspondence with business partners in Chicago, St. Louis, and even New Orleans detailed the vile catalogue of services offered and the premium prices they commanded. One letter, addressed to a brothel owner in Chicago, was chillingly explicit. A genuine sister of charity, untouched before our establishment, minimum $300. Special requests, habit, religious implements. Additional $50 per session. Pregnant sisters command $500 for exclusive patrons. Most damning of all was a small leather notebook found sewn into Sister Elizabeth's mattress. Within its worn pages lay dates, names, and grotesque chronicles of each vanished sister. Some entries were clinical, cold. Sister Agnes delivered to Chicago operation, September 1855, valued at $400. Others dripped. With disturbing relish, Sister Teresa fought magnificently. Callahan enjoyed subduing her. Buried east corner of Beanfield, November 1856. The notebook contained references to one man whose name would send a shock through the church. Dr. William Matthews, a once respected physician from Chicago, whose career had ended in disgrace after allegations of improper conduct with female patients. According to those records, Dr. Matthews had performed medical examinations of the nuns, certifying their health and, most disturbingly, their virginity. This detail, the notebook noted with cold precision, increased their value to clients in the brothels. One entry read, Dr. M confirms Sister Rebecca suitable for premium placement. Recommends maximum usage before transfer to ensure appropriate behavior in Chicago establishment. Guided by the cryptic references in the notebook, authorities extended their investigation to the convent grounds. Beneath the soil of the vegetable garden in carefully chosen locations, they unearthed the remains of 4 women buried in shallow graves among bean plants and herbs. Forensic examination, primitive by modern standards yet painstaking for the time, confirmed Sister Rebecca's account. Each had died by strangulation, their bodies disposed of without ceremony, without marker. One victim, identified as Sister Mary Collins by a small medallion of St. Bridget found with her remains, had been buried more recently than the others. The soil above her grave was barely settled, suggesting she had been killed in the days immediately preceding Father Ryan's fateful visit. Perhaps after delivering the note that would ultimately shatter the convent's secrecy. The fates of the 3 ringleaders were a final, grim chapter. Sister Elizabeth Foster, born Margaret Wilson, according to later investigation, was the only one to face justice. Found mentally unfit to stand trial, she was committed to the Wisconsin State Asylum, where she died in 1863, never speaking again. Her preserved medical records describe her as catatonic except during the night when she screamed of the master coming to punish her betrayal, Mother Catherine Murphy, her true identity lost to time, and Sister Margaret Clark, later identified as Catherine Donovan, no relation to the murdered Sister Teresa, vanished without a trace. Their whereabouts remained unknown. The case of St. Mary's was not merely a scandal. It was a cathedral of darkness, a testament to how corruption, secrecy, and human depravity could intertwine beneath the guise of sanctity. And in the shadows of that convent, the sins of those who commanded its walls lingered, hidden, waiting for another century to uncover them. Unconfirmed reports placed them far beyond Wisconsin, in New Orleans, then Havana, operating similar schemes, preying upon young women and immigrants, weaving the same web of exploitation under different names. Yet they were never apprehended. The scope of their disappearance sent shockwaves through law enforcement. A nationwide alert was issued, distributing detailed descriptions of the women to agencies across the country. Mother Catherine was described as a woman of commanding presence, approximately 45 years of age, standing 5 feet 8 inches tall, with piercing blue eyes and graying brown hair. Her voice bore a slight Boston accent. Her bearing was described as unusual, even unsettling in its authority. Sister Margaret, by contrast, was tall and skeletal, about 40 years old, 5 feet 10 inches in height, with a very thin build. Her dark eyes and prematurely streaked black hair lent her an austere air. She spoke with precision, a chilling familiarity with medical terminology that unsettled those who heard her. Despite these exhaustive descriptions, and despite a substantial reward offered by both civil authorities and the church, They vanished into America's vast frontier. From time to time, whispers would emerge, two women matching their descriptions cited boarding a steamboat in New Orleans or quietly establishing a ladies' finishing school in Havana. But each time, before authorities could act, they had vanished again, swallowed by the shadow of anonymity. James Callahan, the burly enforcer tied to the convent's crimes, was captured 6 months later during a brothel raid. Convicted of murdering a police officer during his arrest, he was hanged. Yet before his execution, he confirmed much of what was already known about the St. Mary's operation, while steadfastly denying knowledge of the leader's whereabouts. They planned for this, he told the prison chaplain on the night before his death. Mother Catherine always said they had escape routes prepared, new identities waiting, they'd done it before, changed their skins like snakes when necessary. When questioned about the references to the master found in Sister Elizabeth's writings, Callahan became visibly agitated. "Don't ask about him," he warned. "He's not someone you want to know, not someone you want knowing you." Whether this master was a religious delusion, a code name for a high-ranking accomplice, or something far more sinister remains one of the enduring enigmas of the St. Mary's case. No record has ever surfaced to confirm his identity or prove his existence beyond those cryptic, chilling references. The church moved quickly to contain the scandal. Bishop Henny was quietly removed to a monastery in Europe, where he spent his remaining years in what official records described as prayerful reflection on his administrative failings. His personal correspondence paints a darker picture. "The blood of those poor women cries out to heaven," he wrote to a fellow bishop in 1860. "I cannot sleep for hearing their voices. Mother Catherine assured me the funds were for missionary work. I never questioned. God forgive me, I never questioned." The convent buildings themselves were razed. The land was sold, the proceeds directed to establish a legitimate orphanage in Milwaukee. Official church communications omitted any mention of the bodies discovered on the grounds or of the crimes committed within those walls. The site was deconsecrated in a private ceremony, attended only by Monsignor Kelly and Archbishop Hughes, with no public announcement. The surviving nuns were dispersed to convents across the country. Each was compelled to sign strict confidentiality agreements, under penalty of excommunication should they ever speak of St. Mary's. Most lived out their days in silent obedience, their trauma buried alongside those whose graves were left unmarked. Their suffering remained unacknowledged, their voices lost to history, swallowed forever in the shadows of St. Mary's. 2 months after her rescue from the shadowed walls of St. Mary's, Sister Josephine Brady gave birth to a child, a daughter born into a world of quiet suffering. Yet her pleas to keep her child were denied. Church authorities, in a decision both cruel and absolute, placed the infant with a devout Catholic family in Pennsylvania. They imposed strict instructions that the circumstances of her birth remain concealed, locked away as a secret too dangerous for confession. This wrenching separation deepened Sister Josephine's wounds. Historical records mark her fate with a tragic finality. In 1861, she took her own life, leaving behind a letter of unrelenting grief and despair. Its few words were etched with unbearable sorrow. "I cannot forget. I cannot forgive. Not them, not the church, not myself. May God have mercy on us all." From the silence rose another voice, unexpected, defiant. Sister Rebecca Murphy, herself a survivor of St. Mary's horrors, refused the enforced vow of silence. She renounced her religious vows, adopting the name Rachel Martin to elude the church's censure, and in 1865 published an anonymous exposé, The Dark Convent. Though Catholic authorities denounced it as Protestant propaganda and moved swiftly to suppress it, surviving copies endure. They tell a story that aligns in chilling detail with the official records of the investigation, a testament to the truth Sister Rebecca risked everything to preserve. In her book's conclusion, she wrote with piercing clarity, "What happened at St. Mary's was not merely the work of 3 evil women who infiltrated holy orders. It was enabled by a system that values silence over truth, institution over individual, reputation over justice. Until the Church confronts this fundamental flaw, there will be other St. Mary's, other victims, other crimes hidden behind sacred walls." The suppression of the Dark Convent was swift and relentless. church authorities moved to purchase and destroy every copy they could find. Catholic newspapers denounced it as anti-Catholic fiction and merciless slander. Even Protestant publishers, initially eager to promote a work that confirmed their suspicions about the church, recoiled under threat of legal action and ceased its publication after the first run. Rachel Martin vanished from public record after 1866. Fragments of her later life suggest she settled in California, establishing a home for women in distress, an early sanctuary for victims of abuse. If this is true, she carried the lessons of St. Mary's forward, transforming her silence into a life dedicated to prevention. Yet history has buried both her name and her testimony, leaving her a ghost herself. Father Thomas Ryan, whose dogged persistence had torn the veil from St. Mary's, was at first lauded for his courage. But as the scandal rippled through the church hierarchy, concern for its reputation eclipsed concern for the truth. Ryan was reassigned, exiled to a remote parish in northern Minnesota. His personal journal, discovered after his death in 1886, reveals a lifetime haunted by what he had seen. "I cannot forget the faces of those poor women," he wrote, "betrayed by those who claimed to represent Christ's church. I hear their cries in my dreams. I see Sister Rebecca's hollow eyes. I wonder about those we could not save, whose suffering continues in those houses of sin. Has God forgiven us for failing them? Has He forgiven the church for silencing the truth?" The final entry, dated January 1886, just days before his death, stands as a haunting testament. 28 years since St. Mary's, and still the church keeps silent. The letters I send to Rome go unanswered. The new bishops act as if it never happened, but it did happen. They were real women with real souls, and they suffered real horrors. If the church will not speak for them, then I pray that someday someone will find this account and remember them. Thus the story closes, not with absolution, but with silence. A silence preserved in history, yet trembling with the echoes of those who cried and still cry from the hidden corners of St. Mary's. Remember Sister Agnes, Sister Bernadette, Sister Teresa, and all the others whose names were buried by silence, whose suffering was erased by complicity, whose lives still cry out for recognition. Their voices demand to be heard. Their suffering demands acknowledgement. Their lives mattered. And yet, just when the world thought it had glimpsed the full extent of evil at St. Mary's, the horror deepened. If this story chills you to the bone, share this video with someone who craves the truth hidden in the shadows of history. Hit that like button to support our work. Subscribe and walk with us into the darkness as we uncover the final disturbing chapter of this American tragedy. The aftermath of St. Mary's reverberated far beyond Wisconsin. The scandal's exposure ignited a storm of scrutiny across the Midwest. Dioceses and church inspectors launched a wave of surprise visitations to convents, orphanages, and schools. What they found was a pattern, smaller, perhaps less audacious, but telling enough to prove that Catherine Murphy and her associates had devised a grim template others had followed. In Chicago, police raids on 3 houses of charity in late 1858 liberated 9 former nuns and 13 young women, all living as prostitutes under varying degrees of coercion. Their testimonies described a system that mirrored precisely the dark architecture of St. Mary's. Cloisters and sacred orders used as cover for the systematic sexual exploitation of women, with wealthy patrons paying premium sums for the desecration of those perceived as pure, as sacred. One survivor, identified in police records only as ML, provided testimony that struck at the heart of the conspiracy. "I was transferred from Wisconsin in 1856, she said. Mother Catherine herself delivered me to Madame Rousseau's establishment in Chicago, telling me if I ever tried to escape, both the church and the law would punish me as a fallen woman. For nearly 2 years I believed her." Her voice, recorded in court transcripts, still trembles with the weight of memory. The brothel owners arrested in those raids named names of prominent Chicago businessmen, politicians, judges, bank presidents, even 2 state legislators who had paid for access to these women. Ledgers seized during the raids catalogued these transactions with shocking precision, yet the cases, despite overwhelming evidence, collapsed before reaching trial. Witnesses recanted, others vanished. Critical evidence was lost. Judges issued procedural rulings so unusual they effectively ended prosecutions. The Chicago Tribune of November 1858 remarked with grim candor, "It appears that justice in our fair city extends only to those without, but powerful friends. The men named in the brothel ledgers walk free, while the women they victimized remain scandalized, abandoned, without recourse. In St. Louis, investigations of similar operations were crushed even more decisively." Monsignor Kelly, the very man who had led the inspection at St. Mary's, traveled there in 1859, following leads that suggested as many as 7 missing St. Mary's nuns had been transported to brothels in the city. But within days of his arrival, he was set upon by unknown assailants, beaten so severely that he barely survived. He was warned, in no uncertain terms, to return to New York. Archbishop Hughes recalled him at once, closing the door on that line of inquiry. Monsignor Kelly's private correspondence with Archbishop Hughes, unsealed in the New York Diocese archives in 1950, reveals the depth of his despair. "I believe we have uncovered merely the visible portion of a much larger evil," he wrote. "The tentacles of this operation extend into the highest levels of society, and perhaps even into the Church itself. I fear powerful forces have determined that this matter shall proceed no further." And so the truth, as it often does, was buried beneath the silence of those sworn to protect it, under layers of influence, power, and fear. The horror of St. Mary's was not confined to one convent, one crime, or one place. It was a symptom of something far greater, far darker, a wound in the soul of a nation, and a warning that evil can flourish when silence becomes the law. The deepest, most enduring consequences of St. Mary's tragedy fell not upon the guilty, but upon the survivors, those 12 souls torn from that cloistered nightmare and cast into a world utterly unprepared to tend to their wounds. For the Church, there was no framework to address what had been done to them. For those who had escaped the worst of the physical violence, the scars remained invisible yet no less profound. Carved into memory, stitched into dreams, a living testimony to years spent under relentless fear, to years spent watching sisters vanish into silence, and in some cases, to years compelled to participate in the suffering of others under the constant threat of punishment. Sister Claire O'Donnell, bound by obedience yet shattered by horror, had been forced to restrain Sister Teresa during her murder. She emerged from St. Mary's a woman fractured. What modern psychiatry would recognize as severe post-traumatic stress disorder took root. Transferred to a convent in Philadelphia, Claire's nights became battlegrounds of torment. She screamed in sleep, spoke aloud of atrocities forbidden to be named. Church records recount repeated discipline for her outbursts and her slow unraveling in silence. Ultimately, she abandoned the religious life, vanished into obscurity after a brief institutionalization. Her fate lost to history, a ghost among ghosts. Of the 5 women rescued from the locked chamber of horror, Sisters Rebecca Murphy, Josephine Brady, Claire O'Donnell, Maria Fitzpatrick, and Anne Sullivan each bore the deepest wounds. Their subsequent paths became a grim testament to the 19th century's failure to comprehend, let alone address, trauma, especially within a church that placed silence and forgiveness above truth and justice. Sister Josephine's tragic end is already etched in memory. Her suicide, a desperate escape after the forcible separation from her child. Sister Maria Fitzpatrick lingered within the church, yet her years were marked by instability. Described by her superiors as prone to hysterics, she lived in the shadow of her suffering within a contemplative order that demanded little contact with the world. She died in 1870, recorded simply as the victim of nervous exhaustion. Sister Anne Sullivan, however, turned anguish into resolve. Bound by her vows and the Church's enforced silence, she quietly forged networks of compassion, offering sanctuary and counsel to nuns who had endured abuse. Her letters, uncovered in the archives of her Boston convent decades after her death in 1899, speak with unyielding determination. "We must distinguish between the divine institution and its flawed human stewards," she wrote in 1875 to a fellow survivor. "What happened to us was not God's will, but human evil cloaked in sacred garments. Our task now is to ensure that these garments cannot so easily be stolen again." The most haunting shadow of St. Mary's remains unanswered, the full scope of its victims. The official church investigation confirmed 23 nuns and 17 orphaned girls trafficked or murdered. Yet Sister Elizabeth's hidden notebook spoke of more, cryptic references to rural acquisitions, to young women abducted from isolated farms and settlements who vanished without record, swallowed into the same dark network that had consumed St. Mary's. In the patchwork of frontier life, where disappearances could vanish into rumor, no one kept count. Local newspapers of the era preserve fragments. Farm girls who left for the East and never returned, domestic servants who disappeared without trace, widows who vanished into the city, marriages that concealed abductions. How many were taken? How many never returned? The question remains unanswered. One entry in Sister Elizabeth's notebook chills the soul. Rural acquisitions this year, 14. Superior quality, primarily Scandinavian. Special commission from New Orleans fulfilled. The words stand as a cold ledger of human suffering. Equally chilling is the fate of the vanished, the nuns who were never found. Of the 23 who disappeared from St. Mary's between 1854 and 1858, only 9 were ever definitively accounted for. The rest remain a silence that still haunts the ruins of history, a silence that whispers of horrors still hidden, of crimes never named, and of victims whose names we may never know. 4 bodies confirmed, murdered and buried in unmarked graves upon the sacred grounds they had once tended, etched an indelible stain upon St. Mary's. 5 others, torn from the shadows of a living nightmare, were liberated in later raids upon the brothels to which they had been sold. Yet the fate of the remaining 14 remains a void in history, a chilling silence that still echoes. Church records hint at a grim dispersal, sold beyond the reach of Wisconsin, dispatched to distant houses of vice in New Orleans, San Francisco, and perhaps across the seas. Attempts to follow these trails proved fragmentary at best, leaving an enduring question suspended in the air. What became of them? A fragment of that truth surfaced in 1872 when a Catholic missionary in San Francisco reported encountering a woman in a waterfront brothel, claiming her name once was Sister Catherine Walsh of St. Mary's Convent. By the time church authorities pursued the lead, the woman had succumbed to typhoid fever, her body interred without marker or memorial in an unrecorded grave. Whether she was truly one of the lost remains forever unconfirmed, yet the missionary's account, in its chilling specificity, mirrors the known record of St. Mary's, with unnerving precision. But the deepest enigma of all lies in the fates of Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark, the architects of this vast corruption whose infiltration of the church concealed a darkness beyond imagining. Historical inquiry suggests Catherine Donovan, the true identity of Sister Margaret, had entered a convent in Ireland only to be expelled for undisclosed moral transgressions. By the 1840s, she had crossed to America, where, it appears, she forged her alliance with Murphy. Together they conceived a scheme exploiting the rapid expansion of Catholic institutions on the American frontier, a scheme cloaked in sanctity, yet built upon exploitation and sin. Their vanishing after the exposure of St. Mary's provoked one of the most determined and discreet manhunts of the antebellum era. Reported sightings placed them in New Orleans, Havana, and Mexico City, always connected to religious or charitable institutions offering sanctuary to the privileged few. The last credible trace emerges in 1863 from the testimony of a former Chicago detective retained by the New York diocese. His report, preserved in the diocesan archives, recounts finding both women in Veracruz, Mexico, operating a finishing school for young ladies, an enterprise bearing all the hallmarks of their prior corruption. He concluded with a warning steeped in dread. I believe these women have re-established their operation under the protection of wealthy patrons. Yet I was warned, violently warned, to cease my inquiry. 2 local officials who agreed to assist me were found dead on the morning of our planned inspection. I can only conclude they enjoy protection at the highest echelons of society. The stain of St. Mary's did not fade with time. It reverberated far beyond Wisconsin's borders. The scandal deepened anti-Catholic sentiment across America in the 1850s and 1860s, with Protestant presses seizing upon it in lurid detail as evidence of systemic corruption cloaked in ritual. Catholic communities in turn retreated inward, shrouding themselves in secrecy, a culture that only enabled such horrors to persist. Most haunting of all is how St. Mary's became a blueprint for institutional response to abuse. Investigations limited in scope, accountability narrowly confined to direct perpetrators, shielding of those in power, relocation of survivors into silence, and ultimately a return to normalcy without meaningful reform. Archbishop Hughes, in private correspondence with Vatican officials, sealed until 1975, acknowledged this systemic failure. "We have removed the immediate cause of scandal and provided for the victims, yet I fear our system of oversight contains flaws grave enough to permit such horrors to continue unchecked. I recommend a complete review of our process for selecting and monitoring those in positions of authority." Those recommendations, prophetic in their warning, were quietly shelved. The Church's preference for discretion endured, carrying the burden of silence into the modern age. And so the physical traces of St. Mary's, the graves, the records, the whispers, were erased, leaving only the haunting question of how much darkness still lies hidden beneath the veil of sanctity. The physical traces of St. Mary's Convent have been methodically erased, as though the very earth conspired to bury the crime along with its victims. The buildings themselves were demolished, leaving no visible foundation, no sign of the limestone walls that once concealed unspeakable acts. The land was sold, parceled, and resold across generations, now overlaid with suburban developments whose residents walk unknowingly above a history steeped in silence. Church archives relating to the case were ruthlessly redacted during the early 20th century. The most damning documents were sealed or destroyed. Even the graves of the murdered nuns were left unmarked, their bodies abandoned to the soil, eventually built over without ceremony, consecration, or acknowledgement. Yet the story refuses to die. It survives in fragments, scattered documents, personal journals, archived newspapers, and oral histories whispered through generations of Wisconsin Catholic families. When these fragments are assembled, they do more than reconstruct the horror of St. Mary's. They reveal the wider pattern of systemic failure that permitted it. They lay bare the peril of unquestioned authority, the vulnerability of isolated communities, and the human capacity both for extraordinary evil and for extraordinary courage in confronting it. Father Thomas Ryan, the priest whose determination brought these horrors to light, wrote in his final journal entry a plea that echoes through the ages: remember them, remember that they lived, that they suffered, and that their suffering mattered. In uncovering their story, however incomplete, we honor that request. We glean lessons about the nature of institutional power, the fragility of human trust, and the vigilance required to shield the innocent from those who cloak their cruelty in sacred garments. The Wisconsin Historical Society preserves a small, restricted collection of materials relating to St. Mary's Convent, accessible only to credentialed researchers. Among them is a water-damaged letter penned in 1880 by Sister Anne Sullivan and addressed to the grown daughter of Sister Josephine Brady, the child conceived in captivity and adopted away at birth. The letter was never delivered, for Sister Anne could not locate her. Yet its closing words stand as a haunting epitaph to this chapter of American religious history. Should you ever learn of your origins, know this: your mother was not shamed but brave. The evil done at St. Mary's was not of God or of genuine faith, but of human cruelty, wearing sacred garments. The true convent was not the limestone building that housed such horrors, but the community of women who sustained each other through them, who whispered prayers and held hands in darkness, who remembered each other's names when all else was taken, who believed in salvation even when God seemed absent. That is the legacy I wish to leave you. Not the story of our suffering, but of our endurance. This is the bitter truth St. Mary's offers. The deepest evils often hide beneath the most sacred facades, and institutional silence can perpetuate suffering long after the crime has been committed. What do you think of this story? Was the truth laid bare, or are there still secrets buried deep in Wisconsin soil? Share your thoughts below. If this tale chilled you to the bone, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share it with someone drawn to the dark mysteries of history. The St. Mary's Convent case became more than a scandal. It became a watershed in American religious history, though one the Church worked hard to obscure from collective memory. The systematic investigation following the initial exposure revealed a web of corruption stretching far beyond Wisconsin, implicating church officials, businessmen, and politici across the Midwest. Though the Church sought to portray it as the isolated crime of three impostors who had infiltrated its ranks, leaked internal documents painted a grimmer picture. Bishop Henney had received at least 7 letters between 1855 and 1858, warning of disappearances and financial irregularities at St. Mary's. Each complaint was followed by a substantial special donation from Mother Catherine to the bishop's cathedral building fund, after which the concerns were filed away without action. Among these letters was a particularly damning exchange from 1856 in which a junior priest reported finding a blood-stained nun's habit in the woods near St. Mary's, a detail that would only deepen the shadows surrounding the case. The silence that cloaked St. Mary's extended far beyond its stone walls, reaching into corridors of power and into the memories of those who lived in the shadow of its horrors. When the scandal first emerged, Bishop Henney's response to troubling reports was telling. Upon receiving news of a blood-stained habit discovered in the woods near the convent, he instructed a junior priest not to investigate further, but to return the garment to Mother Catherine with "our compliments," and to reassure the concerned farmer that theatrical performances at the convent sometimes employed red paint for dramatic effect. 3 days later, a donation of $500 appeared in the cathedral's fund, a grim transaction, sealing that silence. Decades later, the story resurfaced in whispered recollections. In 1932, local historian Margaret Holloway recorded an oral history from her grandmother, who had served as a domestic worker at a nearby estate. She spoke of a fearful knowledge that had lived in the community. "People knew something was wrong at St. Mary's," she said. On quiet nights, unsettling screams rose from the convent's northern wing. Neighbors who inquired were told it was penitential prayer or spiritual exercises, words accepted because in those days Catholic ritual remained foreign and mysterious to protest and sensibilities. Yet children knew better. They ran past the convent's gates, terrified of the sad ladies in black who watched from darkened windows with hollow, unseeing eyes. In 1890, nearly 30 years later, a woman arrived at the Chicago office of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. She called herself Mary Callahan, sister of James Callahan, the burly enforcer executed for his crimes at St. Mary's. She carried with her a battered leather portfolio, filled with documents she claimed her brother had hidden before his arrest, correspondence between Mother Catherine and her clients across the country, detailed ledgers of payments, and, most disturbingly, a list of clerical and political figures who had either patronized or shielded the operation. Her voice heavy with years of bearing the burden of this knowledge, Mary told the agent, "My brother was no innocent. He did terrible things at that place, things he confessed to me before they hanged him. But he was a mere servant in this devil's work. Before he died, he told me where to find these papers. He said to keep them safe until the principal architects of this evil had gone to their judgment. Now that they're dead, the truth can be told without fear." The Pinkerton agent, himself a devout Catholic, was so unsettled by what he read that he bypassed his superiors entirely and delivered the portfolio to Cardinal James Gibbons in Baltimore. The cardinal acknowledged receipt in a brief letter to Mary Callahan, promising that appropriate actions would be taken, but no public inquiry followed, and the portfolio vanished into the church's archives. "I have examined the materials you provided," Cardinal Gibbons wrote in his private reply, preserved in the Callahan family papers. "While I share your horror at what they reveal, I must consider the damage that public exposure would cause to the faith of countless innocent Catholics. The principal malefactors have faced divine judgment. The victims have been called home to God's mercy. Perhaps the greatest service to both is to let this darkness remain buried while ensuring such evil cannot take root again." Mary Callahan's attempts to bring her brother's documents to light were systematically obstructed. Editors declined her pleas, citing lack of corroborating evidence. When she tried to self-publish a pamphlet, the printer mysteriously withdrew after receiving visits from men in clerical attire. Her home was broken into twice, nothing stolen, but her papers disturbed. By 1892, convinced she could not break the wall of silence alone, she entrusted copies of the most critical documents to her nephew, charging him to safeguard them for future generations. But history moved with its own secrecy. In 1908, a fire consumed the Baltimore Diocesan Records Room, destroying countless archives, including, according to family testimony, the entire Callahan portfolio. Church officials described the blaze as a tragic accident, but former employees told another story. Thomas Moran, a retired diocesan archivist, declared on his deathbed in 1947, "I was instructed to ensure those specific documents were stored together against all proper archival practice. When the fire came, it consumed exactly those shelves and no others. And so the full truth of St. Mary's remains shrouded, scattered between fragments of memory, smudged manuscripts, and stories whispered in the dark, an echo of cruelty, secrecy, and power that refuses to be silenced." Draw your own conclusions, for the St. Mary's saga closes not with certainty, but with mystery. The last confirmed chapter arrived in 1912, buried far from Wisconsin, in the sultry shadows of Veracruz, Mexico. Workers renovating a crumbling, abandoned mansion stumbled upon a hidden chamber, a sealed room untouched by time. Within lay the mummified remains of two elderly women seated in chairs facing each other, as if engaged in some eternal, silent communion. Among their possessions were Catholic relics, forged papers bearing names from across continents, and a cache of American and Mexican currency, tokens of lives spent in secrecy. Most haunting of all was a small golden locket, its cover adorned with a painted miniature of St. Mary's Convent as it had stood in the 1850s, a relic of their origins, a cipher of guilt. La Verdad de Veracruz reported on March 12, 1912, that the bodies appeared to have died together, in repose, their evening tea still set upon the table between them. The cups bore traces of a potent poison extracted from local flora. Whether this was suicide or execution, the truth remains forever sealed. Mexican authorities, uncertain of the significance of their discovery, released only fragments of the story to American newspapers, yet the pieces they offered were enough to ignite a storm. Several elderly survivors of St. Mary's, women who had lived with their own scars, identified personal items found in that room as belonging to Mother Catherine Murphy and Sister Margaret Clark. These were the architects of the horror, women who had vanished without trace after the convent's destruction. Evidence suggested they had died around 1880, living out their final years in quiet seclusion, yet never escaping the physical confines of their dark legacy. The most unsettling revelation was a leather-bound journal discovered in the room. Within its brittle pages were coded entries that bore an unmistakable echo of St. Mary's own records. References to acquisitions, placements, and special clients that suggested the sisters had continued their work in Mexico for nearly 2 decades. The journal's final entry, written on the apparent day of their deaths, contained a chilling declaration. "He comes tonight. We have failed him for the last time." The identity of him, whether human accomplice, master, or something beyond human comprehension, remains one of the most enduring enigmas of the case. Some scholars have pointed to connections with obscure esoteric rites known among wealthy circles in the late 19th century. Others suggest something more mundane, but no less sinister, a network of powerful patrons shielding their complicity. The investigation into the Veracruz mansion unearthed further horrors. Beneath its cultivated gardens lay 12 graves, the remains of young women interred over decades. The mansion's records hinted at their fates, lured from remote farms and poor households with promises of domestic work or religious training, only to vanish into the same nightmarish cycle that had consumed the nuns of St. Mary's. As the New York Times wrote in a rare acknowledgment of the affair, the evil that began in Wisconsin did not end there. It migrated south like a cancer seeking new flesh to corrupt. And one is left to wonder how many such operations, cloaked in piety and secrecy, endure to this day. The American Catholic Church's response to Veracruz was muted. A brief statement acknowledged the identification of individuals once connected to a disbanded Wisconsin religious community, but offered no word of the trafficking or the victims. No public reckoning followed, no memorial erected in their honor. Yet today, there stands a quiet memorial garden in Milwaukee, established in 2010 by an anonymous benefactor dedicated to the forgotten women of St. Mary's. No plaque lists their names, no ceremony sanctifies their memory. Still, each spring, fresh flowers appear upon the site, arranged with no witness to their origin. Some say they are left by descendants of Sister Mary Collins, the courageous woman whose slip of paper to a farm boy once broke the silence and brought the darkness into the light. The truth of St. Mary's remains incomplete, fragmented by time, by deliberate destruction, by the veil of secrecy still guarded by power. But the voices of the vanished linger, whispering across centuries, daring us to remember. Amateur historians who have sought to uncover the truth of St. Mary's Convent have met with barriers both inexplicable and deliberate. Records vanish from archives in the days before scheduled visits. Permissions to access church documents are revoked without reason. Independent researchers speak of strange and unsettling interference, threatening phone calls that trail into the night, break-ins in which only research materials are disturbed, and shadowed figures watching from a distance. Some have even reported being approached by unidentified men who issue warnings without words. Someone still does not wish this story to be told in full, concluded historian Rebecca Lawson in her 2003 exposé, Buried Secrets: The Unfinished Investigation of St. Mary's Convent. Whether to shield the reputations of powerful families whose ancestors were implicated, or to preserve the credibility of the institution itself, forces both hidden and entrenched continue to obscure this dark chapter of American religious history. The land where St. Mary's once stood has long been reclaimed by the Wisconsin countryside. New towns have grown, new churches have risen, generations have been born and passed unaware of the atrocities committed beneath their feet. Yet there are nights, particularly in autumn, when the past whispers back. When fog drifts in from Lake Michigan, curling through the trees, residents in the surrounding area speak of hearing faint voices. Some describe them as women chanting evening prayers, others as muffled cries for mercy. Whether these are echoes of memory or something more sinister is a question that each listener must answer for themselves. In 2018, during the excavation for a new housing development near the site of the former convent, workers uncovered something unexpected: a small metal box buried deep beneath the earth. Within lay a rosary, a folded habit veil, and a single folded sheet of worn paper listing 23 names, beneath which was scrawled in fading ink a haunting plea: "Remember us." The box was turned over to the diocesan archives, where, according to those who have tried, its contents remain uncatalogued and inaccessible to researchers, locked away in silence once more. The family of Jimmy Fletcher, the farm boy who, in courage, carried Sister Mary's desperate note to Father Ryan, has preserved its own memorial to the women of St. Mary's. For 5 generations they have kept a small shelf in their farmhouse kitchen. Upon it rests a silver cross, worn and polished by decades of care, said to be the very cross Sister Mary gave Jimmy in payment for his bravery. Beside it lies a handwritten list of the nuns' names, copied carefully from newspaper accounts and updated as new fragments emerged. Great-great-grandpa Jimmy said we should never forget those ladies. Robert Fletcher, the current family patriarch, told a local newspaper in 2020. Sometimes the truth gets buried, but that doesn't make it any less true. Those women lived, they suffered, they mattered. What remains undeniable is this: between 1854 and 1862, within the supposedly sacred confines of a Wisconsin convent, human evil was wrought to extraordinary depth. And yet, the greater horror lies not only in the crimes themselves, but in the fact that the systems meant to guard against such evil instead enabled it to flourish. It stands as a sobering testament to both human depravity and human denial. Perhaps the true darkness of St. Mary's lies not in the limestone walls where it took place, but in how easily it was erased once those walls came down. Remember Sister Agnes, remember Sister Bernadette, remember Sister Teresa, remember all the others whose names deserve to be spoken, whose suffering deserves acknowledgement, whose lives mattered. Remember them, for in remembering, we keep their story alive and guard against forgetting.